Abramowitz.
You got it. It's not an easy one, but I figured if Schwarzenegger could keep his and be famous, I'll keep mine and see where it goes.
Well, I appreciate you coming in here, man.
Sure.
You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit through networking, so I'm really excited to have you here because you're a bit of a renaissance man in your own right, and looking to pick your brain here today. I think.
Yeah, you were one of the first dudes I met when I moved here. I've been here about two and a half years almost,
Yep.
and I remember day one with the old business association group.
Mm-hmm.
There you were, Mr. Nice Guy. So happy to hear you call and say, "Come on in and talk."
That's right. And where are you from again?
I came most recently from Seattle, Washington, after
That's
20
right.
years, but I'm from California.
Ah, California native.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hence the tagline, "Don't California my Tennessee."
I like that a lot. Well, let's start off. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do. Again, you're a man of many talents. You're a professional that has a very creative mind. So you dabble into a couple different things, but you do them all very well. So just kind of talk about what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. My mom thinks so too. Yeah, for the last 30 odd years, I've been a financial advisor in wealth management, a senior vice president for a large institutional firm for 15 of those. And then about 2.5 years ago, decided it was time to seek out my own independence and became a financial advisor for a franchise and actually a managing director, where I oversee other financial advisors doing the work, the gold-plated, white glove treatment of high net worth individuals.
Yeah.
But along the way, I took over a media company, and so I have a lot of hats to wear when it comes to meeting the deadlines to publish the articles and edit the articles, and of course the podcast that I created out of that, coming up on 300 episodes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And that is Heartland Journal.
That's as of April 1st. That's called Heartland Journal Podcast for the heartlandjournal.com website. And we are chugging right along. We just started a new show called Turning the Page with a phenomenal host named Nova Page in Los Angeles for a little bit of a different take on the content. More independent women and entrepreneurs who have a story to tell. For example, we just had General Flynn's sister, Barbara, on, who's a surfer. But she was on, and that's the type of content that's going to create, whereas mine is more arts, culture, entertainment, sports, you name it. Anything that interests me, and I get the guests on, we talk about it.
Oh, that's easy. Fun stuff. Yeah.
A lot of research. I'm very thorough, but yeah, we get some good stuff.
Love it. What'd you go to school for? How'd you get to this realm here that you're in?
Well, that's an interesting come around a big circle story. I went to film school in Southern California
Nice.
after high school from Northern California.
Yeah.
Wanted to get out of that small town as fast as I could. Ended up in LA, the biggest town I could think of, and tried to get into University of Southern California Film School. Graduated and decided I didn't learn anything, so I went back to Northern California and got into wealth management, thinking that I could use a license anywhere I wanted. The goal was New York, but God laughed at that and said, "That's not the plan for you, buddy. You're going to Seattle, Washington," when the firm that I was with was acquired, and they said, "Do you want to go up to the Pacific Northwest and manage that branch, or give up your book and start over from scratch?" I said, "Let me think about it for a second." "Okay, I'll go." So I went north instead of east, and ended up there, like I said, meeting my wife, getting married, having kids, the whole thing. 20 years later, before coming to Tennessee to start all over again from scratch.
Right.
And so that's how that all came about. Still doing the wealth management, coming up on 33 years. And the media stuff is, like I said, 300 episodes. But let's call that, it happened during COVID. So 2022. So that's almost 3 years.
A lot of great stuff came from COVID. Obviously it was a tough time for a lot of folks, but those things like creating podcasts and being more creative and doing some things that you're passionate about, I think, really came about. With you talking, what sticks out to me is you had to have had a lot of confidence in yourself and a lot of faith in yourself and your abilities, where I think that could be very daunting in those times. And now you look back on it and it's, those blessings, right? That God came to you and said, "No, this is the path I want you on." Talk about the courage that you had to have in those moments to, kind of roll, because I'm sure there's a lot of, our kids and today that are not sure what they want to do, and do I need to go to college? Do I need to be here? So on and so forth.
Exactly right. I mean, our the COVID era was the great awakening for some people, right?
Yeah.
Some people it wasn't. Some people didn't make it through with their lives or with their family or with their friends or with their politics or any of these type of things. But I was very determined as a father of two, one that was in the middle of high school and one that was about to enter high school, and seeing the pain and suffering that they were going through, not related to the virus, but related to the way that the society was dealing with it, opened our eyes completely to say, wait a minute, my whole life was born and raised on the West Coast, and I don't think they were doing things right. And so I don't know why I was blessed with this third eye to be able to say, my daughter shouldn't have to go to her recreational swim club and share a bathroom with or a locker room with a biological male, or compete with a so those things made us think we got to move. And my wife was also born and raised in Seattle, so unlike me, born and raised in California, we had the similar ideas, but that broke up families, and we saw that. And if they weren't on the same page, and we were. And so we ended up coming to Nashville, Tennessee, so my daughter could have her last 2 years of high school in a real school without a mask on, and actually, values that we appreciate, which turned out to be a blessing. I didn't think it was in disguise. I knew it, but it had to be proven out. And so she ended up only applying to SEC schools. She got into Auburn, bless her heart. And so it's a phenomenal thing. The football team could use a little help, but as far as the values, for example, when we were touring the school is when the October 7th attack happened in Israel. Oh, wow. And we were very concerned because where we came from, University of Washington, on the campus, that was a hub. They were protesting overnight. They were destroying things. They were all in favor of the terrorists.
Yeah, wow.
We weren't.
Right.
And so we were on campus, and nobody made a peep. They didn't even know. I mean, not that they're ignorant, but they just didn't care that this was happening over there because they had more important things to worry about here in Alabama at the time. Yeah. And we're like, this is perfect. This is great. And so blessedly, she did get in, and she's there. And that is the epitome of what I'm talking about, is that when we left Washington for America, which is what the Heartland Journal is all about, it's Heartland stories that CNN and Fox won't tell you every day, and the podcast as well, that she found it herself, right? And so we didn't have to say like, oh no, you're going to go back to Washington and now we have to worry about you because that's the wrong values we want. She stayed here in the South, and we're like, this is fantastic. We wish we would have found it 30 years ago. Yeah. But it wasn't meant to be. So COVID was the great awakening to be able to say, the day I drove away, I did a radio show with somebody else who passed away since, drove away and just felt baptized by America.
Yeah, I love that. Talk about you've made a couple different fresh starts, right? From LA to Washington to Tennessee. Another daunting task that is not for the faint of heart, and I'm sure there's folks out there that's like feel that they're tied to where they are because maybe it's just comfortable for them. It's it's where their family is. How do you make that fresh start? How do you really put your stamp in another location that you're unfamiliar with?
That's a great question. I've done it now, I think, 4 times.
So you're the veteran.
I know how to do it. I should write a book because I was, when I went to college, I was a Northern California kid going to Southern California. So there you are interacting with all the kids who went to high school together and elementary school together and knew each other. So you got to make friends real fast. Now that I think about it, I chose an out-of-district high school to go to also. So I had to, kind of do it there. Then leaving, so when I look back at all my fraternity brothers and sorority sisters who went to jobs out of college in Southern California, there was the Southern California Mafia, right? Their mom, their dad, they also went to USC or UCLA, and so they could get those jobs. For some reason, I made it hard on myself and said, no, I'm going to go back to Northern California and work with people who went to Cal and Stanford who made a fun of that. I remember my very first managing director on Wall Street basically said to me, he's like, oh, you went to USC? And I said, I had to go somewhere. Right. He was a Cal guy, big Cal guy. So, but football was a different story. So then when it was time to move up to Seattle, it was the same thing. It's like, oh, okay, I'm starting from scratch. I know nobody, ended up meeting my wife and planting my own roots and creating my own family and friends and all that kind of thing. And then again to say, I'm leaving that, going to Tennessee. I've heard Nashville's a 10-year town.
Yeah.
But if anything, the ability to get interviews, let's just say, like Marsha Blackburn, who's the senator from Tennessee, obviously vetted me before she would come on. She's been on twice. And so I assume that kind of gave me that little imprimatur to say, all right, he's one of us. We can actually accept that, as opposed to a lot of these Californians who move here and everyone gets freaked out and say, like, what kind of, what's your politics? Let's talk about that. Because the two things they always ask is, what church do you go to? And did you vote for Trump?
Yeah.
And so once they know that, they say, okay, you're good people. We can hang with you. And so for the first 2 years, I would always say, don't California your Tennessee.
Yeah.
But then I made a big announcement. It's like, all right, I've been here 2 years now. It's my Tennessee.
There you go.
Which isn't really true. It's a 10-year town, but I seem to be a little bit accelerating. And so we just feel so at home in Tennessee. It's been great. So that's the answer, is that once you do decide to uproot where your roots are, your family, your friends, your college friends, whatever the case may be, you got to accept them, as opposed to you come here try to change the people. That's not what it's about.
You got to adapt.
You just have to you have to show them that you're willing to be one of them, as opposed to say you want them to be one of you.
Yeah. What's the cultural difference in just your approach as a professional when you're talking about, even just in sales, right? I mean, you're a financial advisor, so, maybe different kind of clients here than in LA and so on and so forth. How do you adjust to those conversations where, you're coming from a big town to maybe a little bit smaller? Do those conversations change at all in your sales approach, or is there, do you still remain yourself to an extent, but having to adapt to those cultural differences?
You have to stay true to yourself, and I'm blessed to have the same values of the people we're talking about, I think, because, I don't know, whatever that DNA in my brain that said, that we're going to be dedicated to, basically tagline of my show is, we have on people who are lovers of truth and authenticity. When I bring on country music singers, I want the authentic ones, not the ones that do it in a garage band in their garage, and they're really into pop, but they are doing country because there's money. You can tell right away the authenticity. So you always have to stay true to yourself. But what I think I can differentiate is when we moved from San Francisco to Seattle, again, fish out of water, it wasn't that big of a city compared to, say, Manhattan, but it was bigger than Seattle. The folks would know right away, we don't really want to work with the Goldman Sachs folks out of Manhattan because they look down on us. We want to keep it local. We want to do this, which is why we moved from San Francisco to Seattle, is to be local, to compete with the JP Morgans and the Goldman Sachses, who would fly in, treat them like rubes, go back, take the fee, and never hear from them again. We were bringing that local flair, even though we weren't local. And so I'm doing the same thing here in Tennessee, where it's like, I live here now, and if you have to reschedule that meeting because there's traffic on 65, no problem. We're here. Yeah. We will be here. We'll be here 30 years from now when your kids need us. And some people will accept it right at face value. Some people no. We'll talk, 6 months later and see if you really are still here. Yeah. Because, everyone's going to be skeptical that they're going to swoop in and swoop out and take them for a ride. But we are just trying to prove that, no, we are adapting to your style and not doing what they did for 50 years out of Wall Street when the great booms were happening. I saw the booms of Manhattan. I saw the booms of New York. I saw the tech booms in Northern California. And I saw the continuation of the maturity of, say, Microsoft and Boeing with their big wealth, making overnight millionaires who didn't really know how to handle their money. So we worked on with them as close as we could so that we could do the generational planning, not just look for the transactions, right? So we're looking at next generation, college planning, make sure that wedding is exactly what you always dreamed it would be, first house for the kids, all these other estate planning tools that really get you in 360 degrees around a family, as opposed to just, like I said, come in, sell your company, take the fee, and never be heard from again.
Yeah. Let's keep your advisor hat on, because this is what I'm looking forward to diving into with you about. With everything you're saying, it's so valuable to have an advisor, but I feel like, I won't say a majority, but you've almost got like a 50-50 split of the clients that really need you, but maybe are just intimidated by the thought of having an advisor. Let's start with, when should you start looking to have a financial advisor? When do you need one?
Well, so my specialty was always companies that have or will go through a liquidity event, usually in the small to mid-sized company space. Somebody wants to sell to a bigger company. Microsoft was obviously a big acquirer, so we did a lot of work for that. And so the earlier you get involved in that, the better, because people don't know about valuations or taxation or some of the pitfalls that happen when you think like, oh, okay, if I live on a $5 million sale of this farm today, it'll be great. Well, after taxes and fees and whatnot, you may be actually sitting on 3.5. And so we try to get that valuation up. So the earlier there's always the better. And since it's free, there's no harm in just trying to make sure that you're getting the best advice, and then take that advice and look around and say, is there better advice or not? And if it is the right advice, and we like to say that, 99% of the time we are going to be the right advice, you will continue on with us into the future. And then when you start thinking about other things, because a lot of these folks have said, this was my life. For 50 years, I dedicated blood, sweat, and tears to making this company my baby. Mm-hmm. But now I'm actually thinking like, okay, well, I'm selling it. And so I have to look at my next generation to take care of them. So that's when we start talking about wills and trusts and estates and corporate laws, tax laws, state laws, federal laws, all these other things that they're not interested in that. They know how to raise beets. Yeah. So we want to be able to tell them like, well, okay, let us do the heavy thinking or the hard thinking, so you can then decide once you're educated on it by us, this is the right thing to do. Or there's plenty of people, that 1% I mentioned, who was like, you know what? When I die, I want the check to bounce to the undertaker. I don't even care about the next. But most people, large majority, I'm not gonna say 99%, but most of them, they don't want to do that. They want to make sure that their great grandkids have something to remember them by, and we call it, leaving a legacy. And that's exactly what we work towards, is to say, well, have you thought about a college savings plan, or have you thought about a Roth IRA for this kid who's currently in college, doesn't really have a job yet, but could start saving for the future and learning how to save. So the answer to your question is, the sooner the better, but most people we come across are obviously, they don't have the bandwidth for anything new. Like, well, now I have to learn about my finances. I know how to raise this company from zero to this, but I don't know how to do that. That's where we help.
And did you say free?
The consultations in the early days are definitely free. There's pay per service. If they said, well, I really want to buy that life insurance policy, yeah, there's a fee for that, but you wouldn't pay for it if you didn't need it. And so that's one of the differentiators, is that the consultation, just like we do with our social media, the social media is free, because we kind of figure it's like a lost leader, so to speak. We bring them in the door because they need that. Taylor Swift has a $2 million a year social media company. We can offer that for a low cost, and then almost zero. It is zero, so that when they do sell the company, the fee that they assess is worth it, right? There's you're paying it forward.
Yeah. So talk about that then, the cost associated with having a financial advisor, because I feel like it's, you just like you said, the sooner the better. So those folks that are coming out of college, that are ranging 23 to 26, are getting into their careers, don't really know how to make a living in what is now a big town of Nashville that isn't cheap to be here, that is probably even more important to have somebody on your side that is advising you on how you can make a living here. Why should they be investing into having that advisor? Is it worth it in the long run when they have this rent and so on and so forth to pay? Where are the costs associated with it?
So the young folks have a very difficult task ahead with the inflation that we've just been through for the last 4 years, with the cost of housing, never higher before. Somebody who's just out of college and wants to get married and start raising a family, the odds of buying a house are pretty low. The odds of renting a house is even pretty low, and that's something new in yours and I's lifetime. Usually that was the great alternative. That's right. So what we like to do is get as creative as we possibly can. There's a lot of strategies, a lot of ways to skin the cat, but I'll give you one example. We do work with high net worth individuals, and so a lot of times that means the parents or the grandparents have a lot of wealth. If that wealth is just sitting there waiting for the day that the estate planning kicks in, meaning they passed away and we start distributing, and that could be 20, 30 years away, the kids don't want to wait that long for a house, we have an opportunity to sort of beat mortgages. We can do mortgages. Yeah. That's it. That's one thing. But just as a creative, out-of-the-box way of thinking, they can put their assets in as collateral and borrow against them at what has usually been lower rates than a traditional mortgage and pay their grandfather back, say, a monthly below market rent on this property to actually get that life up and running.
Yeah.
So instead of being beholden to the traditional bank or the traditional mortgage company, it's a creative way to say, how can we help our family, our next generation, without selling the farm?
Yeah.
And that's usually what has to happen. If you don't think about these things, you're like, well, the only way, grandson, that I can help you out is if I sell off, 2/3 of the farm and give you some of the proceeds to buy that house. Well, we can avoid that. Same thing with, let's say, if you're at FedEx for 35, 40 years and you have publicly traded company stock worth a couple $1 million, but if you sell it, you got to take a capital gain, right. And that's painful. So how about we don't actually do that? We put it into a collateral account and borrow against it and then make these dreams come true. And if the stock can outperform the interest rate, which can, like I said, be below what a traditional mortgage would be, and it wouldn't be 30 years, we have an opportunity there. And if Junior decides to go on to be at a startup and that startup becomes publicly traded and boom, next thing you know, he's the next generation of multimillionaire, he can pay it all off too.
Yeah.
So lots of creative ways to do that. We've got the lawyers who we call virtual partners. We've got the estate planning attorneys. We've got the exchange facilitators. It's called a lot of opportunities to say, let's open up the Rolodex to do these things that you probably never heard of.
Right.
Because most people are just thinking, well, I have this asset. I either sell that asset to do something new or I don't do it. Well, there's actually 4 or 5 other alternatives that you could actually do, including deconcentrate. So if you are a Ford employee and you do have $10 million worth of Ford stock sitting there and you're like, gosh, I'm a little worried about having all this in one stock, you can exchange it into something that's more diversified and give you safety and then leverage that to do something for the grandkids. Not saying everybody does it, but you can. And that's where we come in. All that advice is free, but when you actually do it, then maybe there's a cost to it.
Yeah, which there's the worth. I mean, if you're doing your job well, then why wouldn't we be paying for that? It's just the cost of business.
Worth its weight in gold, in my opinion. I mean, I can tell you a story real quick. Had a client, since passed away, rest his soul, but he came to me, longtime employee of Georgia Pacific, and had all this stock and other investments along the way. But he came to me later, and I looked at everything, including his prenuptial agreement with his new wife. And he was in his 60s. And I said, do you know, Ron, if you pass away, you have to carve out $500,000 into a trust for Liz to live on. Your son and daughter may not be too happy about that if they have to sell one of your only liquid assets, which was the beach house that they grew up in the Pacific Northwest. And he said, well, what do you want to do about that? And I said, well, you have this leave behind asset, an asset you don't need, and an annuity. Yeah. And I know why you bought this. You were helping a neighbor's son who wanted to, build a driveway between the freeway and your land here. But you don't really need that for your own peace of mind. You're not using it. It's not giving you income. What if we exchanged it into a life policy that would basically give you $500,000 at death in a trust for Liz? She earns the income, and when she dies, it splits that $500,000 evenly between your son and your daughter.
There we go.
And every year when we would do his review, he'd be always like, how did you do this? You made money out of nothing. And I said, well, Ron, that's just my job. I'm here to think.
That's what you do.
And he was a Georgia Pacific guy. He didn't know anything about annuities and insurance and leverage and all this kind of thing. Ironically enough, in my career, he did pass away. We did create the trust. It did put $500,000 in there. We put it in the tax-free bond. She lived on the tax-free income for the rest of her life. She passed away. The son and the daughter did split that 50-50. And they love me now too, because had I not done that, like I said, they would have subtracted $500,000 from the estate during his settlement after he passed, but she went on to live for 3 more years. Yeah. So that's the joy of and the art of what I try to do, is to tell these folks that there's so many more options out there, and they're not complicated once you understand them, but they're so valuable if you do it.
Yeah.
And so to your point, did I get paid when he bought the insurance and then when we bought the bonds and whatever? Of course. But I've never lost a client because of excessive fees or transaction costs. So the good news is I'm fair.
Yeah.
But there are others that aren't, and I get that. And there are others that are too. But if I was there at the early inception with the good planning, and we monitor that planning ongoing for their entire lives and their kids' lives,
Yeah.
I've got a family, right? I've got friends and family that I'm actually servicing throughout this thing. And so back to your original question about how do you come from out of town and do that?
Yeah.
You treat them right, and you do that for them, and then I could, if let's just say hypothetically he had passed away 6 months after I got here, and we had just done that, the widow and the kids, they might as well have gone to kindergarten with them, right? I just saved their family. So
yep, you established a trust. That's awesome. So for the listeners here, if they're wanting to work with the real Stephen A., how are they going to find you?
The fun way to find me is heartlandjournal.com, because that's where the library of everything we've ever done. There it is, stickers. We got hats too if you want to buy a hat. But the financial advisory company is called Mill Creek Financial. The Mill Creek name is what came out of Seattle, and that was the old newspaper, literally paper newspaper that we did in the hometown. Mill Creek View is what it was called, but April 1st it became heartlandjournal.com. And so it's still Mill Creek Financial in West Haven Boulevard there in West Haven, Franklin, Tennessee.
Nice.
And we can do all this servicing and planning, and you get nice glossy PowerPoint presentations to make it all make sense. And then, like I said, hopefully